everyone. Uh, Today we're going to talk about the return to the physical life. So this is kind of like a following theme that we have here. Last week Mirella was talking about reincarnation. I'll talk a little bit about reincarnation as well, but it's going to be more focused on the process of reincarnation and returning to the physical life. Today we're doing the talk in English, so we're trying to do like once a month, like a talk in English. So and if you guys have any questions, we'll have some time for the questions at the end. So I think one of the things that we have to consider, especially most of us here are spiritists, but there might be some people that are still like trying to figure out what is the spiritism, right? Like what really, what is the idea behind spiritism? So I want to lay some ground here before we start talking about the return to the physical life. So the first idea that Spiritism really talks about, and one of the foundations of Spiritism, is the idea of the immortality of the soul. So we, as a Spiritist, we believe that our soul lives many lives, right? So for the talk here today, I actually use the first book published by Alan Kardec, the Spirit's book. And this was a newer version of that book, in the sense that in terms of the translation. So this is a translation that was done by the U.S. Spiritist Federation. So they actually did a translation straight from French to English, rather than the previous version was translated to Portuguese and from Portuguese to English. So this one was a straight translation to English, and that's what I used for the talk today. So anyhow, this is one of the questions here, and from the Spirit's book. So when you see SB here, it means Spirit's book, and what it says is, God has created all spirits in a state of simplicity and ignorance. He has given each of them a mission with a view to enlighten them and to make them gradually arrive at perfection through the knowledge of the truth. So this really shows this is one of the basic ideas of Spiritism, which is really every single spirit was created simple and ignorant, right? In the sense that we had no knowledge of anything, and then we have been in this journey for several lives, and we're still ongoing. So if you're here on Earth, it means we're pretty far from getting where we should be, but we're in the middle of it, right? So, and then the question is, why do we reincarnate, right? So, if you are immortal, so why do we have to go through the process of incarnation? And then there's another question from the Spirit's book that says, how can the soul that has not reached perfection during its corporeal life complete the work of its purification? It's by submitting to the trial of new existence. So every existence that we have, we're going to learn new things, and we're going to kind of purify ourselves, right? It's almost we are really raw at a certain point of our existence, and you're adding new layers of beauty inside of ourselves. So each life that we go through, we add another layer in the top of what we had before, with new knowledge, new teachings, and really purifying ourselves to one day become a perfect spirit, or a highly evolved spirit. So that's really our goal, and that's why we go through the incarnation. And then when you start thinking about that, and when I have conversations with people that don't necessarily believe in Spiritism, they'll say so if God has created us simple and ignorant, why we couldn't go straight to a very or highly evolved state, right? Why do we need to go through the process? So I don't know if you guys had the same idea in your minds. It's something that everybody, that if you start to rationalize, because the idea of Spiritism too, which makes it very different than other philosophies and religions is the fact that we like to rationalize things, right? So if that crossed your mind, that's a good thing, because
the bottom line is why you spend so much time, right? Wasting so much time.
Wasting so much time, yeah. So and that's and Kardec, he, like, when he started doing the Spirits book, and he started doing like this particular research, he had the same question, like, could God exonerate spirits from the trials which they have to undergo in order to reach the highest rank? Like, can we do like really like a shortcut between like when we're simple and ignorant and become like something already that is already enlightened? And then that's the answer from the spirits. If they had been created perfect, they would not have merited the enjoyment of the benefits of that perfection. Meaning, they wouldn't really understand what is to be perfect, right? So that's the idea behind. And also, where would be the merit without the struggle, right? So, and then, you know, I was trying to, I like analogies, so when I'm learning something, I like to create some sort of analogy with things. So I was trying to think, like, what is the best analogy that we can make here to kind of like understand why do we need to go through the process. So I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, I came up with this analogy here. So, which is a factory analogy, right? So this is the manager here, and she's kind of like instructing everybody. You can see like the production line there is completely neat. Everything is working, right? So as a manager, so let's think a little bit about it. So like her goal is to make this beautiful engine here. And you guys can see the engine is pretty complex. It has like thousands of little parts and little pieces in that particular engine. Do you guys think that if she, as a manager, didn't know the entire process, if she didn't study in school how engines work, how the production work, how to keep everybody happy in that particular production environment, do you guys think she would be able to pull that off? What do you guys think? No, she had to go through the process. So I have worked in a production environment myself, and you know, in the very early of my career, I was like only 16 years old. I started working there, and I started learning every single step of the process. So if you don't understand every single detail of a production process, you're not going to be able to finish your engine, right? So that's kind of like the analogy that I got from like the spirits. That's why we cannot cut from like a line employee all the way to manager, because you have to go through the process. You have to learn how to build that engine, how each of those every single parts of the engine here fit together, why they're there. So I think that's kind of like the process of our evolution. So when we start, we are the person maybe cleaning up the floor, but we're going through the process to become a manager of this factory. And this is kind of like the analogy that I came up with. I don't know if it makes sense to you guys, but it's something that when I was thinking yesterday, preparing this, I think that was the analogy that I came up with, right? So something that kind of shows why we have to go through the process, because in order to make this thing to work, we have to understand every single step of the way, right? So and when it comes to reincarnation, there's actually a process. So similar to like a production process on a factory, there are several stages here that we have to go through, and we're kind of going to talk a little bit about each of those processes, right? So the first process is like really, so you know, when we're talking about reincarnation, it means like we already lived several lives, and then we're in the spiritual world now. So we are in the spiritual world, and then we have to come back to the physical world, right? So before we come back to the physical world, the first stage that we have to go through is the reincarnation planning. And when we're thinking about like reincarnation planning, sometimes like depending of the level of evolution that we are, like if we are like more evolved spirits, we actually have a say in our planning strategy, right? So I know I have to work on something on myself, so I like to go through some challenges to be able to overcome those issues that I have. So if you're a very highly evolved spirit, you actually, or I wouldn't say highly evolved, but if you have a certain level of evolvement, you can actually have a say on it, right? For most of us, the planning is not really up to us. It's like what your mentor or like higher spirits that know better than you, like they will actually help you through that. So you not necessarily have a say on it, but you're gonna have someone much more evolved that it's kind of like overseeing everything to help you with this planning. Right? So that's how this particular process works. You're really thinking ahead, and then that makes us also think like a lot of the struggles that we face in life, and then we start like blaming other people. But sometimes maybe some of those struggles we actually chose them. They were there for us to grow. So whenever we're going through those struggles, we always have to think that maybe it's something that I chose. I chose to go through that, right? So when we're going through those problems and issues, we never think about that. We always like try to blame someone, or sometimes like you hear, especially people that don't believe in spiritism or don't believe that even God exists. Sometimes they will say, "Oh, so he or she is such a good person. Why do they need to go through like so much pain and so much struggle, right?" Because they chose that, and maybe especially if they're really good, they're trying to be even better. So, and that struggle will help them to be like that better being, right? So I think, and that comes all the way back to our reincarnation planning many years ago, right? So when we're in the spiritual life and we are choosing what's going to be our next step in our evolvement, in our evolution, right?
Claudio, a few days ago, a spirit manifested in our medium, and he was making some question why he does need to forgive everything of his past, his memory, and come back. He wasn't accept the idea that he needs to start it over from forgetting everything of his memory from
Yeah,
past lives.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that in a bit, but it's part of the process too. It's part of the process to forget what we have done, and we're gonna get there. But I mean, the planning is something that happens, and I'm gonna give an example in a second where a more evolved spirit has helped planning some not so evolved spirits' future, and I'm just gonna talk about that. But so the planning is something. It's where a lot of like again, a lot of our struggles like they will come, and sometimes like we know we have to, for instance, like people. I don't want to give like very specific examples because every single one of us have its own struggles inside. But you know, when we don't know necessarily like on the planning stage, we don't understand very well how we how those struggles will be addressed, but we know something is going to happen to help us. And typically, what we also learn here in Spiritism, yeah, there are two ways you learn. So one way is through the love. So sometimes, like when you help others, and when you see other people that have similar struggles than yours, you realize like you have to be better. So like you learn through the love. You're not suffering yourself. You're seeing like the world around you, and by helping them, you're actually learning and becoming a better person. So the second way, which is typically what we go through, is like the way of pain. So we suffer ourselves, so to essentially learn how to cope and how to become a better being, right? So I always try to be on the first side if I can, but it's not always possible. So we have to be always aware that the more we help people, the more we're gonna learn, because and then ultimately we're gonna the less we're gonna suffer because the more we are helping, we're getting those lessons that we don't necessarily need to go through ourselves, but just by watching others, we're gonna be able to learn as well. So it's something to keep in mind. So okay, so with the planning done, then it comes like to the physical body formation, right? and then they're kind of like tied together too. So if I have to go through some struggle, then then my body will be kind of like adapted to it in a way, right? Um, as a matter of fact, this week, somebody that really made a huge difference in the world went back to the spirit world, Stephen Hawking. If you guys think about this guy, he had every single reason to give up and not do anything about it. He was sitting in a wheelchair. He only could move like a finger, but still, he was still able to do so much for science and so much. Like he brought so much light, and he even like with his struggles, he found ways like to essentially help other people that also had the same kind of problem he had, creating like technology to enable people that are completely paralyzed to be able to type. Even as far as I remember, I think he created some technology to track his eyes. So he has created all kinds of like new technologies to not only help himself but to help other people. And plus, he brought science to a whole nother level. I think he's considered one of the brightest scientists from like the 21st century. So he, and again, he had every single reason to not do anything and just say, "Hey, I'm struggling here. This is hard enough for me," but he never gave up. So I think he's a great example where like his physical body formation was set to be in a certain way, and he didn't let that, you know, implicate in his life. Of course, he had limitations, but he kind of overcome those limitations, and he went beyond what any one of us here could do in terms of science. So he had a brilliant mind, but and that brilliant mind wasn't limited by his body. So he showed to everyone like how to go beyond your limitations. So I think anytime that we feel like, oh, I have like a headache today, I don't want to go to work, think twice, because or think about like Stephen Hawking's. Can you imagine being in his position and doing everything that he did? So I think that's an example where then, you know, it's hard to say why he was in that particular situation. For sure, it was something that he probably did in a previous life.
Or not.
Or not. It could be something, yeah, from this life. But having such a brilliant mind like that, it's
Maybe he might ask for it.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like it's something maybe that was in his planning and that impact his physical body formation, and also even like there are several books that talk about this, about the physical body formation. I don't know if it was like how do you say like missionaries de luz in English?
Missionaries of the light.
Yeah, missionaries of the light. It was one of a couple of the André Luiz books from Chico Javert. Like they actually in one of those the very first books of the series, it talks about the body formation and creating the cells and connecting, going down deep to the science, and how like when people are forming the body that you're going to be part of, how do they pick like the right eggs and the right like spermatozoid to be able to choose the right combination for your existence, right? So your physical body formation is also tied to some of the struggles that you're gonna have in life. Maybe maybe you're not gonna see very well, or you're not gonna hear very well. Like there are things that even our like past lives, in fact, implicate in our spirit. So if we abuse of our body, this existence, it might have an impact on our future existence, because that impact not only happens in our body, but it also happens in our astral body, or in our what we call like the pure spirit, right? So
Claudio, just remind you about some the spirit that came to this life to show us how to be aware of we're gonna say reincarnation, about our lives, like Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, exactly. He had all these limitations. If you compare to Chico Javert, how many limitations he had in his life, and he didn't stop work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Like,
it's just to show us that we cannot stop
yeah, he was
because of some
semi-blind.
limitation, right?
So for Francisco Xavier, for the people that doesn't know him, he was probably like one of like the most known mediums in Brazil that have written more than 400 books and donated all of the money to charity. And and he was partially blind from one eye, and still like his mentor would say, "Hey, you're glad that you have the other eye, so keep going, keep working, right?" So so it's something that to remind us sometimes, like we complain about our body, we complain that we're tired, we complain, we always have like some sort of excuse to justify why we shouldn't do something. And then when we look to those other people that do so much with so little, we should think about that and change a little bit the way we do it. And then, you know, after we go through this physical body formation process, which we don't have much say into that, but it happens, then we really go through reincarnation, right? So, coming back a little bit to the planning stage, talking again about Chico Xavier and also André Luiz, which was the spirit that worked with him for several books. There's a piece of Nosso Lar. It's also known here in the U.S. as the Astro City. There's even a movie. If you guys don't want to read the book, there's a movie which gives you like probably like 25% of the book. So the book has much more into it than the movie, but it actually shows this particular scene. And then this is a scene where André Luiz, this guy here, meets his mom that passed away many years before he did. And she was a highly evolved spirit. She was so high that she didn't live in Nosolar. She was living in higher spheres. So she was like really up there. And she came to visit him, and then he questions her like, "Hey mom, where's dad?" And she goes, "Oh, he's in a very deep lower zone. So he had lovers, and those lovers like brought him in a very dark way. He ended up like going all the way down into those lower zones, right? But she was so highly evolved that she wasn't like she wasn't holding a grudge against him. As a matter of fact, she wanted to help him. So they were planning their reincarnation, where she would marry the dad again, and the three lovers that he had would be like their daughters in a future incarnation. So that's kind of like described in this particular scene. And can you imagine like being such an evolved person to be in that kind of level? I mean, it's completely beyond my understanding right now. But it kind of shows like she was planning to come back. And again, being in such a high level, she can actually do that. So I don't think we regular people would be able to to take such a decision, right? And also, one thing that is important to mention too is the fact that anything that we face, it's definitely something we can handle, because God doesn't give us any kind of burden that we cannot carry. So every single burden that we go through life, it's something that the higher spirits know we can handle. So think about that too. Like, we're much stronger than we look. We can do much more than we really think we can do. So, all right. So now talking a little bit more about the bodies. So there's this question from the Spirit's book too, that says, in the union of a given soul with a given body, predestined beforehand, is it predestined beforehand, or is the choice of a body only made at the last moment? And then the Spirit's answer is, the Spirit who is to animate a given body is always designated beforehand. Each spirit, on choosing the trial it elects to undergo, demands to be reincarnated. And God, who sees and knows all things, has foreseen and foreknown that such and such a soul would be united to such and such body. So everything's planned. So nothing happens by randomly. Everything happens for a reason, and especially when it comes to our body, there's also something tied to it, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have control over our future. So some people might think like, okay, so you were saying everything is planned already, so how can I change my fate in the sense that how can I impact my future? It's really up to you to impact your future. Again, you have the option of maybe learning things in a good way, in an easier way, maybe helping other people, understanding the struggles of the world, or you eventually you will be the one suffering like those struggles. So we have the power in our hands to be able to control our destiny, right? So we and even like when you think about your body, like, and I feel bad to say that because I have struggles in my body myself, but maybe eating well and doing exercise, keeping your mind sane. Those are things that we can do to help our body and maybe avoid future struggles of our body. So we still have the power to do that. We're not necessarily like condemned to go through like a certain struggle with our body. We can still do something about it. It's really in our hands. So we have the free will. That's the other thing that God gives us, and it's part of what we learn in Spiritism. Is really like we have the free will to do positive or bad things in our life, and we even when we think we don't have control over it, we do. So we can always do something. And then there are some situations where we don't have control over what we do with our bodies or with our lives. So in those situations, we have to believe in and trust God and try to understand, like, if we're going through that struggle, why, kind of like abstract ourselves from the situation and try to understand, like, why are we going through those struggles? Like, try to take some lesson from it, right? Not necessarily just go through it as a machine and kind of like power through it. Try to abstract, because if you're going through some sort of struggle, it means that you have to, and then try to rationalize it a little bit. It's hard. It's really hard. So, and then it comes to another point here that Raimunda was mentioning before, which is the forgetfulness of the past. So you might think like, okay, so you're telling me that, or Kardec is telling us that we go through several lives and we learn all kinds of things, but then when we start a new life, we forget everything. Yes, and the reason why so Kardec asks this question: why does the incarnate spirit lose the memory from its past, right? So, and then the answer is, man may not know everything. Without the veil, which hides certain things from its veil, man will be dazzled like one that passes suddenly from the dark to the light. Through the forgetfulness of its past, a man is more fully himself. So I like the analogy with light. So it's like when you are in a super dark room, and then somebody goes and opens up like the window, and then that light kind of like dazzles you, like your eyes. You actually get blinded by that light, right? So if we knew like what we have done in our past, maybe we wouldn't be able to fix some of the bad things that we did to other people, or we would never forgive that maybe someone that is very close to you maybe have harmed you before. So they say in a lot of cases, like especially when you have people in your family, especially people that you don't get along very well, like sometimes were people that either you or have done some sort of harm in your past life, or you're trying to fix that arrangement that you have with that person. They say, especially being a parent, we're not parents yet, but they say like there's a relationship between a parent or a mom and a daughter, or with their son, that this relationship, this love that a mom and their kids create, this bond happens. It goes beyond like our past lives. And then if we had the knowledge that maybe, I did something to my mom in the past, like I would feel so bad, and she wouldn't treat me the same way. So that's why it's very important to not know what happened in the past, right? And then it's interesting because there are some things that are still kind of like within us. So we have this, how can I say, this inner knowledge that sometimes comes like from ourselves. With our mediunic study, we call this anemic knowledge, right? Something that comes from our spirit, and that happens to every single one of us. How many times, like, you guys been through a situation where you start thinking and you say like, oh, I think I know the answer, right? So you're like, if you're going through like a test at school, or when we were back in school, where we still hold that knowledge deep inside of us, but we're accessing that knowledge when we need it. So it's not like we're completely blind. And that shows in a lot of ways, especially like when you see little kids, and when you see little kids, they're 3, 4 years old and they're already playing piano. Like, how do you justify that? Or people that are very good with languages, and people can speak like several languages, like almost like natively. So it's something that most likely came from like a past life, and they're bringing to this life and they're kind of like pulling from like that database that sits in yourself, right? So it's not like we're completely forgetful of our past when it comes to our skills and our knowledge, but when it comes to the interaction of people with people and even us, like, coming back to like my body, like I try to do like diets, and I have tried as many diets as you guys can imagine, right? So when you're going through a diet, and then that day they just, oh, I'm gonna cheat on my diet today. And then you start like, from that day on, like you start like ruining it, because you say, oh, I already cheated on it, so might as well just stop my diet, right? It's almost like the same idea here. So if we knew what we have done, we would say, oh, I'm already corrupted, so why should I try? Right? A lot of people have that kind of feeling, so I think that's one of the reasons why we forget what we have done in the past, because we start with a clean slate to make a new story,
Fresh start.
yeah, fresh start with a new beginning. Right? So I think that's the whole idea. And so and then another thing that comes to mind is, and it's something that it's kind of like debatable between even spiritists. So there are several different opinions here, but this is what Kardec tells us. So, in which moment is the soul united with the body, right? So when does that connection really happen? Because the gestation of process takes 9 months, right? So in which moment is the spirit really connected to the body for real? So what the spirits tell Kardec is the union begins at the moment of conception, but it's only complete at the moment of birth. It doesn't mean like you're gonna be your completely self in the moment of birth, but the connection between the spirit and this new body happens in the moment of birth. And if you guys look, this is the chapter that I mostly use today from the Spirits book. It's the chapter 7 of the second book, and and he talks about a lot of like different things when it comes to the body, and then questions like, so what happens to is there any body that really can live without the spirit? And then the answer is no. So it covers a lot of like the kind of like technicalities of the body and the spirit, like how this connection happens. So it's very interesting. So again, from the moment of conception, the spirit is designated to inhabit a given body, and it's united to that body through like a fluidic link, which becomes closer and closer to the instant of birth. So it even says like, so on the conception, like this little connection happens, and as the baby evolves and like inside of the mom's womb, a sort of like confusion starts to happen on that spirit, like on the spiritual world. So there's even like the way they kind of like explain it And I like to read in the original French to see if it is word by word the same thing. But it says that like to the spirit coming to our world, it's almost like when we die and go back to the spiritual world, right? So they feel a similar kind of like confusion, and they know it's gonna happen, but they don't know exactly when. So so they know like this little confusion starts to happen, and then the more it gets to the due date of the baby to be born, the more of like the spiritual characteristics you start to lose and become more material in a way. So you're going through the process as the baby evolves. Right?
Did you hear with this woman, she was in the hospital with a baby, and then the baby couldn't born, it was late, like 2 weeks late. And then she called her friend, and her friend was a spirit, and she said, okay, I'm gonna check. So she went there in the spirit, and then he said, no, I can't go now. I have to have my birthday here first. I have to blow my candle. When I finish that, I will be born. And then she went back and told her friend, she said, you have to wait. And then she was there after some hours, and he touched her leg. I'm ready. So he did. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everybody has its own time, and again, if you're like a more evolved spirit, maybe you have a little bit more control over it, but typically you don't have such control, right? From what I read and understood, it's not really up to us. It's kind of like the universe moves forces to make that happen, right?
I think I read somewhere the incarnation process is more stressful than the incarnation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't want to scare anyone, but because we also have spirits here that are watching us. But what they say is that so when we die here from Earth, we're limited to our body, right? So a lot of people that says, oh, we have a soul. No, we don't have a soul. We actually have a body. We are a soul that have a body. So that's the idea, right? So when we go to the spiritual world, we are free of our body. So we kind of like expand our capabilities like 10 times, right? So that process, it's traumatic for the ones that stay here on Earth, but for us, we actually are expanding our capabilities.
Or for the ones that are very connected to this world.
Or that's a very
And
good
it takes
point.
longer.
Yeah, if you're too connected to your body, to the materialistic world, you suffer too because you still kind of like have the same feelings and all that, right? But in general terms, if you're good spirit and you're less materialistic, like when you go there, you actually have much more control over yourself, right? Then when you're coming back here, you're you're limiting yourself to your bodies, and you're limiting
You know
your
everything.
senses.
I mean, it's not that you know everything, but you're fully aware, what's going on and what may happen, right?
Exactly. And all the struggles that you're going to go through, like that anxiety, they even mentioned that on the book. The anxiety that you actually go through before is really, it's really big because you don't know if you're going to fail, like if you're going to be able to really succeed, right? So, and that's why it's important to sometimes like remember that. And I think that's why we have the book and we have Spiritism to remind us that we have to take advantage of being here because we have gone through such a hard process to get here. Might as well just use the time that we're here and do something big with it, right? So yeah, again, the same thing like that I kind of touch on the faculties at birth, after birth. So, does the spirit at the moment of birth recover the plenitude of its faculties? And the answer is no. They're gradually developed with the growth of its own organs. So you can see, as a baby, like the baby doesn't have full control of like the arms. When they start talking, they don't have like how can I say? What's the right word? The not coordination. There's a right word for that. They're not fully of themselves, so that's why like they cannot execute the plenitude of their faculties because they're limited to the baby body. Like, so they don't know how to paint, they don't know how to make like a straight line. So it takes a while, and that while is like when we start to become adults, right? Like we're teenagers, that we start to be more aware of our bodies, start to be more aware of our capabilities, and then naturally, some of those faculties will start to rise, right?
Yes, that comes together with the development of the nervous systems, right?
Exactly. So I mean, again, the same idea that we were talking before. We are limited to our body, so we can only do so much as the body responds to it, right? So they say in more evolved spheres that like this process is less stressful because, and even like this time of maturation, is that a good word, William? Maturation.
Sure.
It's quicker because we don't have to go through like the idea of like childhood, and you know, like they say, like the more evolved worlds, everything's quicker, and we also live longer. Right.
And then they say like you have, if you have a kid, dying you can do everything for your kid. To teach from 0 to 7. After 7, they start to go back to, and then all the old incarnation come to them. You can do everything from 0 year up to 7 years old.
Yeah, and then there's also it's also connected to the nervous system and the self consciousness that you can have. It's not only, it's also physical. This is not only a lot of like in one of the books from Andrea Luis, he talks about that, and I think it's action and reaction. I think it's action and reaction that describes that the kid is that the spirit is fully connected when they're 7, but there's also like this physical aspect of it, right? Like, you know, before you're 7 years old, again, you cannot like really draw like a straight line, and even if you think about like in education. We have kindergarten, and then we have like your first grade. How old are you when you're in the first grade? 7 years old, right? 6 or 7? 6? Is it 6? Oh yeah. Back in Brazil, it was 7. Yeah. So yeah, back in Brazil, like it's 7 years old. You're in the first grade. So there's some. It's not only like spiritual. It's also like here, like people understand this as 7 years old. It's when you really start learning and being able to read and things like that.
Yes, like psychologist says that before 7 years, the brain are fully capable of like learning more languages. Like the child can learn like 2-3 languages faster than when he's older than 7.
Yeah, because it can soak more information. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, that why we forget, because when we're like still like in that particular period, we're more open to, you know, I mean that happens to every single one of us. Like when we were kids, we're open to anything, and as we grow older, it becomes harder and harder to do things because we maybe struggled some years back, and we're kind of like reluctant to do things again, right? So as we become older, we become more reluctant because maybe we live things and we had like experience that we didn't like. So when we were kids, like you're open to anything, like you're
Little walking sponges.
yeah
It's
you're
like
not afraid of anything.
It's like me. My mom used to say I would see things or people that were not here anymore. Like my 4, 5, and after 7, I couldn't. She didn't. I couldn't see it anymore.
Yeah.
She said that I forgot or something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's you know it varies from person to person, right?
So Claudio, you're talking about faculties, right? After birth, and we're talking about playing piano, right? Which is very complex, right? But the simple fact of walking is a very complex thing, and scientists cannot explain how a baby can start walking like a 1 year old. I mean, it's too complex.
I just say the other animals are much better at it because they're already born walking.
Yeah. So they cannot really explain it because the complexity of all the muscles, right? The coordination to walk.
Yeah, and it's complex, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing that what Natty, my wife, said is that, you know, when you look other animals, they were born walking, and they're process of the process to become an adult development is much shorter. And you would think like, why we human beings like have to take so long to be an adult, right? So if you think about a dog, in 1 year the dog is already like an adult. A horse, I don't know how many years, but like for a human being, let's say on average 15, 16 years that start to become like an adult. So why? Have you guys ever thought about why this happens?
No.
Any idea? No?
To break stronger bonds with the mom and dad.
Exactly. We are, remember like we were talking about being forgetful of our past and everything? The idea here is that since we fully depend on our parents and our mom and your dad, or maybe your grandma, whoever raised you, we're fully dependent on them until like we're 16 years old. This spirit is there. The spirit is there for us to create those bonds and those connections, like in a much deeper level than other animals do. So that's why it takes longer. It's really like that's what the spirits tell us, right? So those bonds and connections, and this really happens in this 16 years, 16, 17 years, depending on the person. So the chapter also covers something about the short existence of some spirits. So, and what they say is that, often, like, if a baby is born already dead, that's more for the parents than for the kid itself. They also mention that sometimes when something like that happens, and that's not necessarily on the Spirit's book, but we have read this in other literature, spiritist literature, is that to extend a previous life that was ended prematurely. So a lot of like those babies that either born deaf, or when people go through natural abortion, that's more for the parents than for the baby itself, right? And they even mention that every single baby that is born carries a spirit. And in some cases, like when something like that happens, sometimes like there's no spirit involved. So that's what the Spirit's book say. We kind of covered that already. The infancy process, why we go through the infancy process. And again, the aim of incarnation is the improvement of the spirit subjected to it. A spirit is more accessible during childhood to the impressions he or she receives, and which make this its advancement to end, to which all who are entrusted with his education should contribute. So when we are kids, we are more prone to listen to our parents. Then when you become an adult, you say, "Hey, Dad, I'm already like 30 years old. What are you talking about?" So that's why we go through the process. And then another topic that is covered on that particular chapter is the fact that is moral progress tied to intelligence somehow? So meaning, you see like some highly intelligent people that are so bad. An example was like Adolf Hitler, right? He was a very smart and very like passionate person, although he wasn't necessarily like a good person. He used that in a wrong way, right? So that was the question. How come it's that some men who are very intelligent, which shows that they have in them a spirit of considerable advancement, are also extremely vicious? And the answer was, it's because the spirit incarnated, it's a man, it's not sufficiently purified, and the man yields to the influence of other spirits still worse than himself. So there are different ideas of like evolving your intelligence and evolving your morals. And that's something that, my wife is a teacher, and we always talk about that, like, especially here in the U.S., the schools are very focused on the intelligence piece, especially here in the Bay Area. Schools are very aimed, you have to go through EP classes. It's very focused on your in your intelligence, in the sense that you have to have A's, you have to be an A+ student, but they not necessarily touch on the moral. So she gave me an example the other day. She has a very smart student where, very bright kid, and then at the end of like the lab, they left a mass, right? And then she goes like, where are you guys going? And he goes like, oh yeah, we're gonna leave it there. And she goes like, no, you guys have to clean it. And then the kid goes, too bad. He goes like, too bad. And then she goes, too bad. She can tell the story herself. So you can tell like this kid has a highly evolved intelligence. He's a bright student, A+, but his morals are not necessarily there. So the parents are so focused on like, oh, you have to be an A student. But we as parents, I mean, that's of course important. We have to push our kids to be very intelligent and bright, but we also have to remember that that's not the only thing. So intelligence that have to come with the morals. So I think it's something that the spirits are trying to tell us here.
But some parents basically, because they're very intelligent, and they forget the other part, the moral part. So they focus more on the knowledge and academic part, but they forget about it. That's what happened in school in the end.
Yep.
I did a preschool and I see, and I have a lot of people like this. And within the school in Berkeley, they have a subject in the class called Pistopologia, like pissed off logia. They teach all the morals. So the kids take the class, but they don't know what they are taking. I was watching the class. So it's a religious school, it's a Catholic school, but it's not religion, but it is a religion. But the kid doesn't see that, and the parent doesn't see that it becomes the Pistopologia.
Yeah,
It's very good.
yeah. I think we as parents we have to remember because in a lot of ways, kids are not taught how to deal with their emotions, right? How like even us, like as an adult, like when I started learning about spiritism, I started to identify sometimes like I'm frustrated or that I'm maybe sad, and some people don't know how to identify like those feelings because nobody taught us how to identify those feelings. So, but that's a conversation for a whole new topic. And the very last thing I want to talk about, which is something that nobody likes to talk about it, is abortion. So, what is the Spirit's view about abortion? And again, we're here in California where, it's a place that you can legally have abortion. So, what the Spirits tell us, like, the idea here is, like, why? So, what are, for the Spirit, the consequences of abortion? And when it's asking about abortion, it's not necessarily like something that happens spontaneously. It's something that you create. And the answer is, like, it is an existence that is null and must be commenced over again. So the Spirit's book, and I can even the next question that I didn't put it in here would say, is voluntary abortion a crime regardless of the length of the pregnancy? Every transgression of the law of God is a crime. Taking a life of an unborn child is a crime. For doing by so, a soul is prevented from undergoing the trial of which the body thus destroyed was to have been the instrument. So I think, and that's my personal take here. Of course, so what the Spiritism say is that abortion is something not good, right? But at the same time, and there's also like I read a little bit more literature. I mean, as a spiritist in understanding this a little more, maybe when I was younger, I didn't have like that particular knowledge, right? I could have done something like that. It's something, and now like that we know that we have this knowledge and we understand this, we're much more liable to it, right? From a spiritist perspective, right? But meaning, if something like that was done in our past and we weren't aware of those consequences, what is in the past is in the past. So we have to look forward. And one of the things that even the spirits book says that there are alternatives to abortion. So especially like for young adults, if they don't know how to cope with like a kid, that's why I put this here. So there are alternatives. You don't have to kill a baby, because can you imagine like how you're gonna feel after that? It's something that it's much deeper than because some people would say, okay, I'm gonna do an abortion and that's it. I'm gonna feel great after that. I solved my problem, but is it really? Like, is it something that you really not gonna think about after? So there are alternatives, and I feel like people spend more time talking about abortion itself than ways to prevent it or ways to what are the alternatives to abortion. So I think we spend too much energy talking about abortion itself, and I think we should spend more time talking about how to prevent an abortion. What are the alternatives to an abortion? Like, how can you guys do that with your kids, with your friends, instead of like talking abortion itself or being with or against it? Let's talk about like how to prevent abortion. How can we help people that maybe don't know what they're going to do with their kids? There are alternatives out there. You don't need to do an abortion.
Is it in every case, even those fetus that not going to survive after?
No, so the book actually tells that, he covers that here, and I can read that portion. Hold on. It's question 358. Yeah. So, when the life of a mother is at risk by the birth of the child, is it a crime to sacrifice the child to save the mother? Right? Like, that's one example. And then it says here, it's better to sacrifice a being that does not yet fully exist than a living being. Right? So there are cases where, I mean, if
the mother is not in
yeah.
jeopardy.
Yeah, so there's also there were like another question like that. So it was saying, or maybe I read someplace else. Even in some situations where the mother, let's say, and it's again nobody likes to talk about this. I don't feel comfortable either, but it's, let's say some rape happens, right? So from the Spiritist view, like you have to go through the process somehow. Like that's the Spiritist mentality, that you had to go through the process, and there's some reason why that's going to happen. But the answer to that, instead of like doing an abortion, why not choose work with another option, which is adoption, or like, if you don't want to cope with that within your life, there are alternatives that you don't necessarily need to do an abortion, right? So because again, even let's say even if something like that happens, which is something really, really terrible, you're gonna know and you're gonna have deep inside of you that you killed a baby, right? How would you feel like every day thinking that something like that happened? So it's better to maybe cope. And I feel like, coming from Brazil, I can tell like here in the U.S. this is something much more acceptable than in Brazil, because people would think, oh, how could you let your kid go to adoption? I think like here in the U.S. people are much more acceptable of that, to the fact that maybe some kid is not like fully capable of raising a kid. On the other hand, from the Spiritist view, like if you had a baby when you were 16 years old, you had to go through that. So again, it's something that was sort of planned. So you have to, and there's a reason that baby is coming to you. There's a symbiotic connection between you and the baby. So so maybe again, it's something that we have to learn how to cope with it, right? So we're kind of like we need to wrap up here. So and I brought 2 messages to finish the talk. And this is also part of like No Solar, and it's the very beginning of the book. So, and it's pretty amazing. So it says, how many lives, how many bodies, how many centuries, how many tasks, how many triumphs, how many deaths are still allotted to us? And yet, religious philosophers will speak of final decisions and immutable situations. So we have been here for a long time, and we're gonna be here for a long time. So coming back to our live series is not easy, so let's take advantage of it, right? And the last message I want to bring back to you guys, and this is from Chico Javert. He says, although nobody can go back and make a new beginning, meaning we cannot change our past, anyone can start over and make a new ending, right? So we cannot do like whatever we did, we cannot do anything right now to things that we did in our past, but we can always start a new future, and we can always start a new story here. So let's not condemn ourselves for our past. Let's change ourselves to make a new ending and a happier ending. So hope you guys take this message with you this week. And we're going to go to the past now. Thank you.